I'm Laura.
And we are two best friends who do a deep dive into a new book series, one book at a time. Right now, we are breaking the earth as we discover N.K. Jemisin's The Obelisk Gate, the second book.
Obelisk Gate.
And her Broken Earth trilogy. But before we dive into this bummer of a book, it's magnificent,
It's so sad.
but it's a bummer, and it just makes me feel
so many
all
sad
the
things
sad
happen.
things. Laura, what are you reading, watching, and or enjoying?
So I read, okay, this was a manga that I had seen other people talking about on Bookstagram, and so I picked it up. I'm not exactly sure on the pronunciation of it, so listeners, apologies. But it's Frieren, Beyond Journey's End, Volume 1 by Kanehito Yamada. And this was a super cute manga. Like it's about this um basically like if you know of like a typical like D&D type story, how there's like, oh, there's the mage and there's the dwarf and there's the warrior, you know, that all journey together on a mission or whatever. You have this group of people, and the mage is an elf within this group that's journeying, and she ends up outliving everyone else in her group by a lot. And it's just kind of an interesting portrayal of like what it means to live on and find meaning in your life. And I think it's geared towards a younger audience. Like this is maybe more for like middle grade or early young adult than most manga are, because I feel like a lot of manga where I would say like, oh yeah, high schoolers could read this. A lot of them handle darker themes and stuff. This one is one that I'd be like, oh yeah, I think that this is something that like a younger audience could handle.
Yeah.
But very cute, some great art. I did have to take some pics of some of it because it was really pretty at times. But I thought it was really a heartwarming thing where the characters are kind of like discovering the passage of time and trying to decide what meaning to take from their life and how to develop relationships and deal with the time that you have. And I thought that was kind of a neat message to have in a story.
Especially for like middle school people,
Yeah,
where I remember being like
younger
really,
audiences.
I went to like a school where a lot of us didn't go to the same high school, and it was very sad. And like thinking about what your friendships were going to look like
Yeah.
after middle grade, especially when you're like that young, it's like sad. So that's
And
awesome.
it's interesting from the standpoint too of like these characters where you have this one that's like living on for such a long time, and the other members of the group were passing away, and they had done all these things together, and they felt like they really knew her, and she's like, oh, I hardly knew them. Like, and they're like,
Yeah.
well, we spent like 30 years together. And she's like, oh, that's like nothing to me. Like, that's might as well have been a week. So for
That
her to,
awkward time when you realize that someone's not as into your friendship as you are
yes.
with them. Oh, that's
But
heartbreaking.
then you start to reassess your whole like outlook on life and be like, oh, well, maybe I need to be a little more genuine with my relationships and put a
Yeah.
little more thought into some of these things. And I really appreciated that take. I don't know that this is like one of the best manga that I've ever read, but I might continue with the series because I thought that it was interesting and cute
Yeah.
and neat theme. So I'll probably continue with it if I can. The library is just giving me one volume at a time. It's likely not one
So
I'm
rude.
gonna buy. I'll just get it on Libby.
That's
Um,
fair.
but yeah, I would say enjoyable for sure. Um, and then another book. I'm gonna save the other Vinland Saga books to talk about them next time. But another book that I read via audio. This was one that was on Libro FM's sale months ago
Okay.
that they had was That Librarian, The Fight Against Book Banning in America by Amanda Jones. Amanda Jones is a librarian in Louisiana, and I'm just going to preface this by saying that I went into this book expecting something different. Like,
Okay.
I thought it was going to be more of like a here's what we can do, here's how to take action situation. And this was not that type of book.
Got
And
it.
I'm not going to say that this is a bad book by any means. That's not the situation. I just
No.
think that my expectations going in were different, and I was wanting a different type of book and did not get what I wanted. So that kind of clouded my reaction to this book, unfortunately.
That
But
feels
this
like it
is
happens a lot with nonfiction, where like you expect
the
kind of
titles, they get
the
you.
title. I think about that mediocre about it was like the history of white men, and that it was just like not about that. And I was like, well, that's
Yeah,
not really what I mean. Like, obviously, I think it's an important message, but I also came to read about a historical context book, and I don't think I felt that.
right. Well, this was a book that essentially is just a memoir. And Amanda Jones is a librarian in Louisiana who unfortunately dealt with a horrid, like online attacks and death threats from members of her own community because she refused to just bow to book bans and remove specifically books that contained queer characters, queer um, joy, anything related to mostly queer stories and queer representation in books.
Okay.
And so she received a lot of vitriol from her community, which, and like I said, this is a memoir, so she's detailing a lot of the things that happened to her in her court cases and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that, and the things that were said to her. And she talks about her journey through therapy and all these things, and a lot of the emotions involved with this, and how even in her own situation, like she's just trying to kind of protect, free
Or
speech
yeah.
and people's right to see themselves in fiction and in the library in books that they read, and how thought that she was kind of protecting everyone in this situation because, as we know, book bans can be a slippery slope.
Yes.
So yeah, it just didn't work out that way, and she unfortunately dealt with a lot of really hurtful situations, and it's also really harmful when it's like people you've known your entire life
Yes.
that are making these kinds of attacks towards you and everything. And there was a lot of mentions of like current political climate and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
which, uh, yeah. So I totally empathize with everything that she has gone through and all this, but I think I was very much hoping for a book that was more like this is what we should do
You were hoping for
to
like a call to action activism book.
yes.
And I think that it's fine to have this memoir because that's also a very important
I do think
story.
that this is an important story as well. This to me honestly does not seem that unfamiliar, and that's because I grew up in a very similar type of area, not in the South, so it's a very different experience because I live in Illinois and that
Mm-hmm.
is very different than being in the South. But I grew up and still live in a very conservative community,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to deal with a lot of similar situations in terms of like discussions surrounding politics in my day to day life, which are difficult. And granted, I'm not dealing with online threats and stuff like that, and obviously nothing to the extent that she has gone through. And
Right.
but a lot of this does seem familiar to me, unfortunately, and not like that far out of the realm of possibility. But I do think that her story is one that is very important for other
Mm-hmm.
people to hear about and to kind of get as like a warning, like, hey, don't think that this can't happen to you because it absolutely can and will. So yeah, I think
This
it's
is
an
more just our PSA to say, like, hey, listen to these books or read these books as well. But we just
mhm.
want nonfiction books like worded or titled
Yeah,
better because
like
sometimes it's
please
just
be better about the
confusing.
titles.
Do you know what? I remember from my childhood, there was a book that was just the most trauma porny book I've ever read. It was called Don't Laugh at Me. And it was about
Okay.
this girl's like it was awful. This girl's like bullying during like middle school and high school. And I remember my sister gave it to me, and I was far too young to be reading this book, but it was like awful. But I'm like, yeah, that was a book where you knew exactly what you were getting into. It said, "Don't laugh at
Yeah.
me," and it was this woman's memoir about how horribly bullied she was. I like this poor
Mm.
girl because, of course, she's getting bullied, and then she had this like physical like body where she developed one boob faster than the other, but like egregiously, where she had to get a breast enhancement
Reduction.
and reduction and enhancement to make
Mm-hmm.
them equal. So for a while she was wearing like a bra that corrected it, that like
Mm-hmm.
someone threw it in the toilet, and it was awful. I do remember that book vividly. It's weird how these books stay with you as an adult, where you're like,
Yeah,
I definitely remember reading that one. That
that's
and the
awful.
there that was huge when my sisters were in high school. And then I remember I also grew up during the time of A Child Called It. Do you remember that book?
Okay, I remember other people reading this book and it was like a really popular thing, but I never read that one.
I never read it because my mom wouldn't let me, but I remember she read it, and it was like a child who had been abused, and it was like
Mm,
real bad.
mm,
Um, yeah, so I remember that book, and it was a huge bestseller, but also it's just such a strange world we lived in the early 90s where they were like, do you
yeah.
remember when we read all of these books that were incredibly depressing and we just like talked about it all the time? And now
Mm.
it's Fourth Wing, so you know.
Oh my. Oh my. We've cycled all the way back around to Akatar. Oh my.
Sorry. um,
Yeah, I
but
I think and this was one I don't even think I rated this book on Goodreads or anything because I don't know how to rate memoirs anymore. Like
yeah.
I just struggle with that and I also like I said like I was expecting something else out of this book that
Hmm.
I didn't get and it was just a memoir and there's nothing wrong with this book at all. I think this woman has an important story and I really empathize with her, but it was just like you said, not the call to action that
Yeah.
I was expecting. So kind of let down by that book, but at the same time, Amanda Jones seems like a really cool person, and
Hmm.
I do think that she's likely because of all of the media attention and everything that she got, she is likely now one of those people that's probably doing a lot of work on the front lines there because people recognize her now.
Hmm.
So that may be something positive that's come out of all of this is that she is able to be one of those people leading the charge in terms of like fighting book bans.
And honestly, she needs to get on those groups who loved Don't Laugh at Me and A Child Called It, because I feel like they would really buy into that. Sorry, not to be blasé about someone's own like very, very serious struggle. That was a joke told in poor taste, but you know what I'm saying.
I get what you're saying, but that's not to diminish
No,
the
I'm not
online.
diminishing any of those
Yeah, no,
stories
no.
because they
Those people
stuck
were
with me.
terrible.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was kind of my experience with that. And then as far as watching, I watched with my husband the first I guess there's only four episodes of the SNL 50
Oh,
documentary.
I've been wondering, is that good?
We really liked it.
Okay, good
We're
to
SNL
know.
fans though.
Yeah.
I've been a huge SNL fan for a long time.
Hmm.
Like I remember watching it and I think I started watching it like seventh or eighth grade and watched it all throughout high school and everything. I'm very much a night owl, so it's like no problem at all for me to just stay up on Saturday nights and watch the entire SNL and then watch all the reruns of Friends that are on after. But that this was my life in high school. I had no friends, just the friends on Friends. But so, anyways,
That's
I'm sad. I'm a sad person. But anyways, the SNL documentary, like, there's a couple episodes that are a little bit like behind the scenes where they tell you about like how the audition process goes. And that one was fun just to see like some of your favorites, like their audition tapes, that kind of thing, or like get some behind the scenes info of like how they sometimes look for certain people or some people they bring in or whatever. And I kind of appreciated that. Or like they mentioned, like, oh yeah, anyone who goes over 10 minutes in their audition automatically
they're
does
in.
not get put cast for SNL.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, they're out. But the only person that was cast and made it into the cast was Keenan Thompson, who is now the longest running cast
Just
member of
been there
SNL.
forever. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have just like a soft spot in my heart for Keenan Thompson because I was an all that kid. So, so I've literally watched him do all sorts of like acting and skits and sketch acting for most of my life because he's been doing it forever. And he's just one of those people that I feel like I will never not find him endearing or funny. He's just always going to be funny to me.
Yeah.
But they also had an episode on like the weird season of SNL, the one that Robert Downey Jr. was on.
Oh my gosh, that is
and
so strange
Marlon
to think
Wayans,
about.
and it was like an entire episode dedicated just to this season, and they like went in depth on it and everything. And I was like, what an odd choice, SNL, to make one of these like 50th anniversary episodes about the weird season, the one where everything went wrong and everything. And I was like, I kind of dig it though. I kind of dig that they did this.
Here's the thing though, like young people do not understand Robert Downey Jr. and the turnaround that man did. Like there's so
Well,
much
and
to
they
Robert
mentioned that
Jr.
too, like
like
how successful he became and everything. And I'm like,
because no one expected it because he was someone who like I mean he does not talk about it now, which well within his rights to do. He was an addict who has
pretty
said
much
like
none of the people in that cast talk about in that specific season talk about
yeah.
SNL anymore. They're
Well,
just like, that was a terrible experience.
he has like left interviews because like Robert Downey Jr. was like well known to have like a history of drug use and abuse. And like there have been people who like ask him outright questions on interviews and he's like, I'm not answering that. And if you keep asking me, I'm leaving. And he's just like, I do not have to answer to this. This was a part of my life. It is done now. And like he refuses to talk about it, which well within your rights, you shouldn't
I mean, they
you
obviously
don't
did not
owe
get
anyone.
a
Yeah.
interview for him for the
Exactly.
documentary.
Because he doesn't talk about it. But like he was like crashing and burning. He was like a Hollywood starlet who like ended up going on Ally McBeal and he was supposed to be Callista Flockhart's like main love interest for the rest of the show. And
Mhm.
he had to leave after a season because he was like, I physically can't. They were all like, he can't be here. He can't do this. I'm pretty sure Robert Downey Jr. broke into someone's home during this. Like he had a wild history that like no one talks about. So like it is rife with for discussion to just see like the historical past and like have that context
Well,
there.
I mean, that's just Robert Downey Jr. They obviously
Yeah.
talked about the other members of the cast and everything too, and how it was like a unique season because Lauren was coming back and he was supposed to revive SNL, and basically
Mm,
everyone was just like, "This is bad." It it took like a lot of weird choices to finally make people be like, oh, okay, we'll keep watching this for a season. We're not going to cancel it. And this is also the season where John Lovitz started, and he basically got his big break in this. But they had like Randy Quaid was in this from
oh my gosh.
people will know from National Lampoon's Vacation or Christmas Vacation. Joan Cusack was in this cast. Anthony
That's so
Michael Hall.
insane.
Anthony Michael Hall apparently was cast first in season 11. And then what happened was they were like, you know what you should do? Bring in his best friend, Robert Downey Jr., because those two
Mm,
do everything together.
yeah.
And also, Damon Wayans was in this cast.
That's wild to think about.
Damon Wayans apparently dealt with a lot of racism, and they even admitted it too. Like
Oh.
a lot of the sketches were just pretty racist, and he was kind of getting fed up with it, and how he was kind of being just typecast in all these roles and everything, and how he had reached out to a couple of previous members of the cast to be like, hey, like, how did you deal with this? How did you avoid getting these like very stereotypical roles? And they're like, you got to write your own sketches. Well, it ended up being a thing that he just continually was not able to get good sketches and continually getting bad roles and stuff like that. So he ended up kind of causing a scene during one of the SNL episodes because he was upset, and
Yeah.
Lauren fired him. And
Oh God.
because I guess that's like the number one rule, like it's SNL is very much a scripted show. Like people will break, but it's not something where there's improv. People have the misconception that it's an improv show, and it's just not. Everything is very detailed and laid out.
Yeah.
And Damon went off book because he was upset, and so he got fired. And it was just kind of a bad situation. But they said that it was likely the catalyst for his success because the people who leave SNL become really successful,
Mm,
and so he ended up being really successful, and we know that now. But yeah, it was just not a great situation. And that was a very interesting episode. They also did one just on like the writing process of like following some of the writers for a week and how they have to put in just incredible, horrible hours to write these sketches, and how it's just very competitive and stressful, and it kind of seems like they're being pitted against each other a little bit
mm.
to get their sketches on and everything. Even though they're all like kind of friends, it does seem like there's tension there and everything, which seems so
Very
stressful.
sorority and fraternity
Oh,
style
it
energy.
seems
Yeah.
so stressful. I have thought before of like myself thinking very highly of myself, like, Laura, you should write sketches for SNL. You occasionally can be very funny. And then I'm like watching that episode, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can handle the stress. And I don't think I'd get enough people to like me because that'd be part of it that you have to really get people to like you in order to get them to, like your sketches and stuff like that, or to want to work with you on a sketch. It just seemed very stressful. But the episode that was our favorite was they did a deep dive on the cowbell sketch.
Oh, jeez. Yeah. Gotta have more
That was
cowbell.
like a mimic of the Blue Oyster Cult song with the cowbell in it.
Yeah.
We were cracking up because they actually got members of Blue Oyster Cult to talk about the cowbell in in like their song and all this. Those people were so serious in this documentary
Oh,
episode. Like,
really?
yeah, the Blue Oyster Cult people, they were like so serious about it and everything. And they were like upset about the way that, like, well, actually, Will Ferrell was portraying so and so, and he was the lead guitarist and he was playing, like, they were getting so like mad about it. And then they're like, well, that's supposed to be me. I'm the one that's Christopher Walken, not him. And then they cut away to the other guy and he's like, no, I'm Christopher Walken. And we were just very much like, oh my gosh, these men in their 60s and 70s are so dramatic and annoying. But it was an awesome episode because it was just, you could tell that all of the other people that they're interviewing for this, like the people that were involved in the sketch, like Will Ferrell and Jimmy Fallon and all them, they're very much just like in on the joke. They're just like, we don't care. This is absolutely ridiculous that we're doing a deep dive documentary episode
Right.
on this
Yes.
specifically. But the Blue Oyster Cult people were not in on the joke and they were taking it very seriously. And
Oh,
that
no.
contrast just made the
That's so good.
entire episode very, very funny.
Good.
Very funny. But
Good.
if you like SNL, you will very much enjoy those 4 episodes. I kind of wish
Nice.
they would do more. I'm
I
disappointed that that's it.
I've been interested in watching that, so I
Yeah,
was I
you
was
should.
wondering if it was good.
You would probably like the season 11 episode more, but I think that we just really enjoyed the ridiculousness of the cowbell episode
I actually
because
love
it
stuff
was
like
what it
that.
was.
Like it's so funny to watch. Like anytime on TikTok it pops up the the Dana Carvey where they were like doing a deep dive into the David Carvey show, and they're all like watching like they're watching an ad for it, and it's like a home
Mhm.
improvement episode where one of the boys is sick and he's like, I don't want to die, Dad. And he's like, we'll get through this together. And then they're like, a special episode of Home Improvement. And right after, the Dana Carvey show brought to you by like root beer. And they all just burst out laughing because they're like, oh, that's so bad. I think about that all the time. I think that's the funniest thing in the world. So watching some people take it very seriously versus
Yeah.
people being like, you just gotta have more cowbell. I mean, what are you
Hmm.
gonna do? I think that is very funny and amusing to me.
Yeah, I think you'd enjoy it. But
Good.
the other thing we watched was because Peacock has been just like really pushing this movie
Mhm.
Conclave.
Oh, how was it? Yeah.
We liked it.
Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't say I get that it's gotten a lot of award nominations and
Oscar
everything like that. Like,
Liz.
yeah, a lot of buzz around it. We liked it. I don't. We were both like, this is a good movie, but I don't know that we were like, wow, this is the best movie we've ever seen. And I
Mm.
think when stuff gets as much hype as this one has been getting, we tend to kind of be like, oh, this has got to be the best movie I've ever seen. And I don't know that it was, but I do think there were some good performances. I did appreciate too, just like I've heard just people within the Catholic Church like talk about and review this movie, and they've said that it's fairly accurate in terms of like the process involved in like a conclave or selection of a new pope, which I thought was interesting that they did their homework and seemed to accurately portray that.
What a great extension of the last accurate one, Angels and Demons.
No.
uh for people who don't know, Angels and Demons is who's that author that we did the
Dan
episode on?
Brown of Da
Dan
Vinci
Brown,
Code
Da Vinci
fame.
Count. Please go listen to our Da Vinci Code episode over on Fuckboys of Literature
Oh my
because
gosh.
what a time.
And do not watch that movie.
Watch that movie. It's worth it.
Watch something else.
Watch Tom Hank run around in a wig for for
No, you know
five
what? I'm
hours.
gonna recommend go watch Endgame twice because
Literally, they made three of those movies, didn't
yeah,
they? That's insane. I watched two of them. I've never seen the third one, nor will I
you know
probably.
what? You're better off taking Endgame and watching it multiple nights in a row
Fair.
than watching those movies. I only complain about Endgame because it's just incredibly long.
It
But
is very long.
uh no, Conclave is pretty good. Ralph Fiennes is the main actor in that one, and he does a good job. But yeah, I
Do you
thought it was
just
interesting.
call, isn't it Ray Fiennes?
I don't know what his name is.
His name is Ray Fiennes. What did
Why
you
did I
call
call
him?
him Ralph Fiennes?
I mean, it is like it's spelled Fiennes, which I understand, but his
I have
name
no
is
idea
Ray
why I was thinking. I
Fiennes.
didn't know what his name was.
I just,
I
I
just
love
was
it.
remembering
No,
from the
no, no,
credits.
that's beautiful. I love, yes, I loved that. No,
Okay, I don't know what his name is.
his name is Ray Fiennes.
Ray Fiennes. Okay, my bad.
No, you're fine.
I'm just
Because
trying to remember from the credits.
I just didn't want you to get at in our Discord of Ralph Fiennes or
I
I
don't
can't even
remember what his
say.
name is.
No, that's fair. I'm glad he did a good job.
Yeah, he was good. Also, what's his name from Third Rock to the Sun? I
John Lithgow.
John Lithgow, thank you. He was excellent in The Crown. I really liked him as Churchill. He does a great job in everything he
He's a
does,
good
really.
actor, I
Yeah,
feel.
he's just phenomenal. And he seems like just kind of a really nice guy, honestly, in like interviews and all that. I'm like, "Oh, he kind of seems like someone I want to be friends with." But he was pretty good at it too. And then obviously Stanley Tucci, like the Tooch. Yeah,
I mean, you gotta love him.
everyone loves him.
Yeah,
So he was
I do
great too.
too. So
But Hannah, what have you been reading, watching, and or enjoying?
So on our nonfiction kick, I really like Eric Larson. I've read like at least three of his novels. So I listened to The Demon of Unrest, which is a saga of hubris, heartbreak, and heroism at the dawn of the Civil War. And you want to know what I found out? I don't really care to learn much about the Civil War. I think I
Mm,
learned enough about it in like history classes throughout my time. Because it's really just a deep dive into the early world of the election of Lincoln, along with can't even remember the name of the place. Um, oh, what's the stupid? I listened to an entire book on it, and it's just out of my head. And like the overtaking of Fort Sumter and the fall of it, and like kind of how it happened. And it's interesting, but it just wasn't for me. Like I had such a hard time listening, and I just kept thinking, like, I know enough about the Civil War that like listening to a deep dive is not fascinating to me. Um, so I didn't particularly like it. I do like Eric Larson's work. I really liked Devil in the White City, and I also read Did Wake, The Last Crossing of the Lusitania. That one was fine. I think I don't care for when he talks about boats. And I also read In the Garden of the Beasts, which is about the
I own that
American.
one.
Yeah, it's about the American ambassador during Hitler Germany, and I really liked that one. So, really liked a couple of these, and then some of them just like whenever it's about boats, I don't. I apparently I don't
Here's the
care for
thing, Hannah.
boats.
I don't know if it's about boats or is it because it's about a more random historical topic.
Yeah, well, like usually I think I like his more random ones, like oh, an
That's what it
ambassador in
seems like.
Nazi Germany. Super interesting. The Lusitania I definitely liked more than this one because I was like, I don't know that much about the Lusitania. Fort Sumter, give or take, I didn't care, so
Hmm.
I don't know if I recommend it, but he is a good writer and he is like an interesting writer where he pulls from like letters and different like
Hmm.
notes throughout history. And I actually think that's a lot more interesting to read about people's like writing during the time, which is why I
Sure.
usually like him, is he has like more of a conversational way of talking about history. But this one just
It's a very
didn't hit for me.
storytelling way because
Yeah.
I read Devil in the White City and then that's what led me to pick up. I bought In the Garden of the Beast, but I have not read it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's a very like storytelling type of writing that makes history more accessible.
Exactly. And so I usually like it, but apparently Fort Sumter was where I left it on the table, which is like, oh, I know
But
quite a
also,
bit about
it
Lincoln.
might just be
Like,
like you don't like that topic. Like you might
yeah,
just not like Civil
just
War books.
I just don't care for Civil War books.
Yeah,
So,
and I think that's
um,
fine.
I
There's a
think
lot of
that's also
people that are
fine.
just like well, this
There's
has been
so
a
many
topic
Civil War
on.
buffs, so I'm just like, you know what? Maybe I just am someone who I am such an anti like what everyone else likes sometimes, and I think that happened with Civil War, where I was like, I learned about it in school. I'm kind of done talking about it right now.
Well,
So,
I think there's like a lot of people that are just kind of getting burnout on like all of the Civil War and World War II books,
mhm.
even within historical fiction, because
Yeah.
people were talking about that on Reddit where they're just like, "Ah, I'm just kind of over those particular, that like particular subset of genre."
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know what? I kind of get it because there's so many historical fictions that are within World War II, and there's so many just historical nonfictions that are set in World War II, and the same with the Civil War. Like those
Mhm.
maybe were like the romantasy for a while that everyone's like,
Yeah.
we got to read those, we got to write those, and publishers push them really hard, and now people are just kind of like,
I don't need it
I'm over
anymore.
it.
Right?
We've gotten a lot of stories now, so.
We've gotten so many stories. I just don't need to hear about it. Although
And
there
again,
was
that's not to
very
detract from the importance of these
no.
stories, just that we kind of go in waves of like what we want to read as is
Yes.
normal.
You know what I did like hearing about? There were two people in that book who had a serious flirtation, and the second the Civil War ended, they were like, "Peace out, bye." This was a situation ship, and I'm like, "Great, love to hear it. That's fun."
Why
But
does that have to be brought up?
I don't know, but it was brought up a lot. It was so funny because it was like a powerful people, and they were like, "The war was over. Their situation ship was done," and I'm like, "Yeah, it
Random?
was." So that was a book, and then I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks lately. I've been kind of going through like brain reading slump because of the state of the world, but bring on the cozy listening. And cozy listening I did with A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. This is a YA murder mystery novel where a girl named uh, Pippa Fitz-Amobi is doing her high school like senior project on the disappearance of a schoolgirl named Andy Bell uh who was allegedly murdered by Sal Singh, and she does not believe that she was actually murdered by Sal, but we find out through the course of the novel early on, so slight spoilers, please skip, but you find out that Sal he he is believed to have committed suicide and
Mm.
admitted to the murder of this girl, but she went missing and was never found. And it's interesting. It's an interesting like mystery. I really liked this book. I thought it was fun. It was just kind of like, a murder mystery for high school girls, so it's nothing too
Mhm.
deep. But I do like that like it delves into things like the inherent the inherent racism that comes when something like this happens, because of course Andy Bell is a blonde girl and Sal was her ex-boy or was her boyfriend who is Indian, and so there's a lot of like racism involved with that, and it also delves into like you meet his brother and he has moments where he's like, I don't get to miss my brother because he did this awful thing and no one lets you talk about that and you're not allowed to miss him. And I think that is a complex thing we never
Yeah.
talk about, is how families get ostracized when things like this happen. um and I thought it was a good time. Like it was interesting. There was enough like twisting and turning to keep you guessing. I thought like it does that thing that you and I talk about with YA novels all the time, where it's like, did you need at least two of these plot points? Could two of them been
It's like it's getting a little too complicated and
it's
it's so fast paced that I can't keep up.
who are these people and why do they all have nicknames?
Damn
That kind of
it,
energy.
Jay. What is your actual name?
What is your name? Sarah does not need to be Sarah. Um, so I definitely enjoyed that one. I think I will continue. There's another book or two on these, so it's like, oh yeah, I'll listen to another one because it was
Mhm.
fun. Um, but yeah, it was a simple book. It passed the time, and then I'll save my other one for next week to talk about what I have been watching. Because Laura,
Mhm.
I have been watching Ghosts on Paramount Plus,
Okay.
which is a show where Samantha and her husband Jay try to open an Airbnb in like northern New York. And she has a near death experience. And then she finds out that the Airbnb, or not Airbnb, a full blown bed and breakfast, sorry. But she finds out that the house they purchased is haunted with a lot of ghosts and she can now see them. and she gets to interact with them, but her husband can't see them. And it's like a very quick comedy. Like each episode is only 20 minutes on Paramount
Hmm.
Plus. So they're very snappy. And it is very throwback to like old sitcom type stuff. And it is a ton of fun. Like it's not the
Oh.
best television show you're ever gonna watch, but it has laugh out loud moments that just like get you because it has like there is a Viking because they're all from different decades. So there's like a Viking, there is a Lenape man, there is a man from a continental army. Um, there is an uptight like lady of the manor who is the great 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 grandmother of Sam, and then there's like and you just like get all these ghosts who like come out, and there are so many funny parts like in the basement they it used to be like a leprosy like place where they like put all the people with leprosy, and they just like live in the basement and they're like awful to hang around and they're just like rough hangs and but then everyone else is like really really stuck on like this is my room, you can't have people in it, so they're trying to open this bed and breakfast and they're all like I'm not giving up my room, and like how dare you, I'm a ghost and I can't do that. So they're it's very very funny, and one of them is from he died in 2000 from a drug overdose, but he died with no pants on and like
Hmm.
no underwear or pants. So he's just wearing like a long button down shirt that like covers his genitals, obviously. But they make so many jokes about it. Where like at one point someone said, like, well, I'll just like, what if I just walked around pants and all the ghosts? And the guy who doesn't have any pants, Trevor, goes, I wish I had underwear. And then the lady in the
Oh.
manor goes, we all do, Trevor.
Oh. It's the
And it
wish we all had.
and it's there's just certain parts of it that it's really fun. So like in one episode Sam's husband Jay is extremely into D&D, and she finds out like one of the ghosts is from the 80s and he loves D&D, so so Jay makes her play with them because she is the only one who could speak for all the ghosts, and she has to spend like 4 hours doing it and she hates it. So the next day she was like,
Mm.
I'm so sorry, Jay. The ghosts hated it. And
Oh.
like one of them sitting there and he's like, you're lying, you're lying. And Trevor, the guy with no pants, has the capability to like write on things, like he could kind of manifest. And so they get him to write on the mist in the shower on the mirror, she lied. And Jay walks out and he goes, she lied about what? And like it makes Trevor physically painful. And he goes, come on, man.
Oh.
And then he like comes in to yell at her, and he was like, the ghost told on you. And she goes, damn it, Trevor. And he goes, oh great, the guy with no pants was watching me shower, that's good to know. Like, so it's just it has very funny moments, and I've been enjoying
Hmm.
my time, and I think there's been like it goes by so quick to like watch a quick 20-minute episode. And it is funny because the person who plays Sam, Rose McIver, is the lady from the Christmas Prince movies. And so sometimes it's funny watching her and
Interesting.
being like, because she was on actually like good, like a lot of people like the movie, this TV show iZombie, and she's
Hmm.
not bad at this. So it's very interesting to watch her and be like, so she like knows what the Christmas Prince is, but she just like glazes over and gets through those as fast as
I
she
mean, she just
can.
wants money.
Yeah, she's getting that Christmas Prince money and that ghost money, and she's getting out. So um, but yeah, I'm having a good time with Ghost. It was a fun time. So that's what I've
Was that on
been.
any network or was it just straight to Paramount
It's
Plus?
on CBS.
Okay.
So
Because I
yeah.
feel like I'm remembering seeing that one and I wasn't sure if it was just like from an ad via the internet or if I had seen an ad on like local TV for it because I'm picturing like a yellow wall with
Yeah.
pictures hanging.
And it's actually made from BBC. Like it's a remake from a British television show.
Okay.
So I want to watch the British television show after I get done with this one because I think that would be a good time as well.
For sure. I feel like
Yeah.
usually the British adaptation or the British originals are better.
Better. Yeah, I know. But I'm enjoying this one. I like don't and like it's there are like some heartfelt episodes, which is
Hmm.
nice.
Well,
Like
I mean, it's a show about ghosts.
yeah, like
It's
they
gonna I
with a
absolutely fall into that.
with a lot of funny moments of just like what's happening, you know? So it's
Sure.
good. All right, shall we dive in to the
Let's do it.
second part of the
So we're
obelisk?
in the middle section, chapters 8 through 15, covering
Mm-hmm.
chapter 15. So we start out here in chapter 8, and we're picking up our shares when we hear others complaining about Yika. The calm is growing and it's experiencing growing pains.
Mhm.
Namely, people are trying to come into the calm and they're being asked, can you live with origins? And they're trying to create Castrima to be this society where everyone can be there, where there's not this divide between origins and stills.
Well, and it's built on origin, so they're like, hey, you
Mm-hmm.
have to be chill with us because we are an important part of this culture.
Absolutely. And we've been gardening and we've been trying to help Yika. And we actually really love like doing some of these mundane things as an advisor, just like trying to solve people's problems. It actually kind of brings us a lot of joy. We
Hmm.
end up going into Castrima over and we notice that there's more sulfur in the clouds and things do not seem to be getting better. And we start thinking about the motives of the Stone Eaters while we're up there and we think about Hoa who has been missing.
Yeah,
And
that's strange.
it's a little concerning because Hoa's usually hanging around us. But then we notice these bodies that have been impaled in the distance. And
Hmm.
this puts everybody that's with us in Kostrima over on edge. And we start speculating and recognize that the impaling isn't likely occurring anymore because meat is scarce, but it's most likely some kind of way to mark territory. So there's some
Yes.
kind of group that's in the area and trying to like send a message like, hey, this is our spot.
Hmm.
So we decide that we need to send a party out to check things out with an origin for protection. And Yarka is super nervous, and we end up showing a Taurus to Yarka to prove our power, to which she says, not everyone can do that. So we end up basically starting a new fulcrum where we're teaching others. But at the same time, we're still learning from Alabaster ourselves about magic
And he is
redistribution.
so upset that
He's
you
very
are
upset with us. He's like,
working with the
you're teaching others.
community.
You need to be focusing on your own training. And so we get into this fight and we notice this change in his body too. And we also have this moment of recollection where we realize that Alabaster struggles with us the way that we struggle with Nasun in
Hmm.
this like mentor relationship, but also this loving relationship where we're trying to protect you. You're so stubborn. We're trying to do things for your benefit. And
Generational trauma.
yes. And we tell Alabaster, we're like, look, you're not a good teacher. And you really need to kind of work to gain our trust. And finally, he's like, you know what? Fine. I'll tell you where I've been the last 10 years. And
Hmm.
Antimony gets angry that this is happening and enters the ground. So
Hmm.
then we switch over to Nasun in chapter 9. And Nasun is in her new home, which has the city of Jeketi at the center. And it's a
Yes.
place that Schaffa convinced the former occupants to let him set up a guardian facility. And now there are 3 guardians there, and there's 9 children because one
Hmm.
of them vanished somehow.
Yep.
So Jija is there and he's healing. But eventually, once he heals, he becomes pretty useful in his trade as a stone napper. And he's accepted pretty quickly in the community in Jeketi. And Nasun behaves well, so she's also accepted. So even within this found moon and this city of Jeketi, where there are guardians and there are origins there, it's still a struggle to find community.
Yes.
And there's this origin that we met previously, Eights, who is an older boy, and he welcomes Nasun. And Nasun is just fascinated by him and the other children. And they're also
Because this
fascinated
is
by
her
her.
first experience with like actual
Yeah, other people
openness.
like her.
Yeah.
And they're also fascinated with her because she has a lot of power and also Schaffa favors her. Like she
Yes.
is the clear favorite. And Nasun realizes that she is kind of a rarity because she was
Hmm.
born to origin parents and also she is a lot more skilled than
Hmm.
the other origins there. And per usual, Schaffa is manipulating her and Nasun is just like drawn to him and she notices that there's something wrong with him. And Shafa is curious about Nasun's mother, but reluctant to, and Nasun is reluctant to share information about her mother,
Hmm.
but she ends up doing this because, Shafa is just a master at manipulation and getting what he wants, and it's disgusting. And so she ends up,
So good at quote unquote showing love to people
yeah,
who feel rejected and feeling like he's giving them something, so they owe him something.
sickening.
Yeah.
So she ends up sharing about her experience being taught by her mother and how it wasn't a gentle experience. And she shares that Esun broke her hand in
Mm-hmm.
her training. And this kind of like set something off in Schaffa's brain, like, whoa, wait a minute, that sounds familiar. Nasun is still convinced that she needs to remove her
Mm-hmm.
orogeny, and she feels this just intense love for Schaffa, and she learns how to heal him. There's this thing in his head, and he makes her promise to keep it a secret.
Yes.
So we switch back over to our point of view, and Alabaster shares with us that he this is like right after the events in Miav that he fought Antimony on the way down, but
Mm-hmm.
he sensed what was happening to Inan and Koru, and in that moment he just was overwhelmed and kind of shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And when he came to, he was in this city on the other side of the world, and this
Such good
also I just
world
wanted to point out
building.
that what's this?
Such good world building to be like,
Oh,
I was taken
absolutely.
to the other side of the world. And you're like, oh, love it. Thank you. Oh, that's exactly what I wanted to know.
Sure. And I just wanted to point out that we as Esun had a similar moment in that we were basically just like kind of taken out of that moment where Inan and Koru were killed, that
Yes.
we just shut down. So it's interesting to know that Alabaster also had that happen. But when Alabaster came to, he was in this city on the other side of the world with this like volcano and this massive hole in the center of it. And we find out that it's called Core Point. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a Stone Eater city that has been theirs for tens of thousands of years.
Yes.
And Alabaster eventually learned from the Stone Eaters that he was purposely saved from Meow to face the enemy because the ancestors tried to dig a hole to the center of the world for power, and they made the obelisks to harness power.
Mm-hmm.
But the obelisks misfired. So the moon was then flung from the planet and the shattering occurred. So this is just the start of all of this.
Yeah.
And we are the enemies of Father Earth, the origins, for what we did to it, and that guardians were then made to control us. So we're in this like three-sided war.
Mm-hmm.
And the Stone Eaters used to be human, but are tens of thousands of years old. And this is why Hoa can't remember who he is, because
Yeah.
how could you remember something that was that far in the past? So Alabaster tells us, he's like, one day I actually jumped into this hole. He's like, it's not committing suicide if you're just curious. And so
Well,
that's
we have a moment where we realize like Alabasters is actually like a genius on top of being like incredibly powerful. So his brain just
right.
works certain ways. And we're just like,
Well, it's
yeah,
because we're always like trying to understand him, trying to wrap things around him, trying to like put him into a box, and it's difficult to do. And I think we oscillate between trying to understand if he's a genius or if this person is maybe, losing it.
yeah.
We're unsure. So this is one of those moments where like, okay, no, he's really a genius. He's so far beyond what we can comprehend that we don't give him enough credit.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Alabaster jumped into this hole in the earth, he realizes that the earth is alive and that all of these stories that had been told about evil earth and its child and all this, they were true.
Mm-hmm.
And that he had to create the rift to end the world. And he asks us to give his body to Antimony when he dies. But we're like, we're just not ready to do that. And so we kind of get into it with Antimony a little bit. And Antimony then tells us that the moon is on its way back and it's been flung out and it's
Mm-hmm.
on its way back in this trajectory, and that we need to use the obelisks to channel the power of the rift that is occurring because there's so much energy from this rift that was started to catch the earth using the obelisk in like this almost like matrix form
Yeah.
and then bring it back into orbit with the earth, which will end seasons because
Mm-hmm.
basically it'll create normalcy. So then
Yes.
all of this is just overwhelming to us. So we end up going to sleep at Alabaster's feet because we just want to look at him. We're just still trying to deal with all these mixed emotions of like loving him but being frustrated with him but being grateful, but then also despairing that all this is happening to him because he is slowly dying.
Yeah.
So while we're going to sleep in our exhaustion, antimony sings, and it's just kind of like this eerie sound, but it's also soothing. And we had this moment where we're just like exhausted and fall asleep because we actually weren't ready for this information, even though we thought we were.
We are constantly saying we're ready for information that
And
we
then
should
we
not
never are.
have.
We're never ready.
We're never ready. It's really good though, because it's a good juxtaposition with like our relationship with Alabaster is like Nasoon and us. Like it's very much
Hmm.
mirroring. So it's
Yeah.
interesting to have that.
So then we switch over to Schaffa, and Schaffa is having dreams, and he's like knowing that this is a bad sign. And he dreams of his mother and how he became a guardian and was almost killed in the process. But that process caused him to live with this chronic pain.
Hmm.
And he dreams of children finding this pit in the fulcrum and how some of them died. And he dreams of the fear that people have of him and how there was this horrific situation where he forced himself on a woman and
Hmm.
she became pregnant. And when he tried to kill the child, he ended up killing her whole family
Hmm.
instead. And it's just absolutely horrific. And he
It's also
dreams
really
of
creepy because he's sitting there talking about like this in these sections you find out he's like, well, I smile because it gives you endorphins and endorphins make you happy. And I'm like, well, and happy people don't kill their husbands, do they,
to
Shaffa?
combat their
Yeah.
pain,
Yeah,
which is
it's wild. Yeah.
there's a lot of layers to that too that
Hmm.
I think we should try to remember to talk about when we get into the characters and themes, the smiling in regards to
Yes.
Shafa and his chronic pain.
Hmm.
Um, but he's also dreaming of Lachette, the guardian, and of the girl that he found in a barn.
Hmm.
And so then he goes into the children's cabin at Found Moon to check on them. And he's looking at Nassun and he's like, this is Demaya. How did I not
Hmm.
realize this before? That this is absolutely Demaya. And he starts having these moments where he's like horrified by things that he did in the past. And he's like, I was just a terrible person. I was abusive. And he asks Nassun, like, are you afraid of me? And she says that she's never afraid of him. And so he decides that he's going to stop using her to help his pain.
Hmm.
And he doesn't use her in that moment. So then we switch over to Nasun, and Nasun is actually kind of enjoying the freedom that she has at Found Moon and the affection and care that Shafa shows for her, which is just so unfortunate. But
Hmm.
she's Shafa's favorite, and she does get some privileges with that. And she's learning more about Erogeny, and she's learning about herself and about this silver that exists, and that the others can't seem to detect, which is mysterious.
Hmm.
And she learns from Nita and Umber, the other guardians at Found Moon, that origins were previously cold for being able to sense this. So not all origins were able to go on and exist in the way that they're existing within the fulcrum, like we know of Essun and Alabaster existing like this, that there were people that were cold and selected based on what they could do. So Jija ends up making his house kind of homey, which Nasun likes, but he's really leery of Eights and he doesn't want her around him or to learn any more about Orogeny. He's like starting to kind of
He doesn't
doubt
like
what's
that
happening here. And
Ace
he's
is
like,
older and he still does
and that he's an
orogeny.
origin.
Yes, because
He,
he should have quote unquote healed himself by now.
yes. And so he's really starting to doubt Shafa because at this point he's like, so that kid is got to be like in his 20s, which I don't think he's 20 at this point. I think
He's
that
like
it said that he's
18 or
18.
something. Yeah.
So, I mean, he is older, but it's one of those situations where Gigi came here on the assumption that his daughter would be able to be healed of her orogeny,
Hmm.
and Shafa kind of made it seem like that was possible. But now Gigi's like, well, I don't know what's going on here because Shafa said that this is going to happen and now it's not. And so this kind of sets something off in Nasun where she starts to feel afraid and she goes to Shafa and she requests to learn how to hide her orogeny, which
Hmm.
prompts Shafa to question if she's safe. And Nasun's kind of like, don't worry, like I can manipulate him, but it's really stressing Nasun out. And Schaffa threatens to kill Jija if he
Mm-hmm.
harms Nasun or any of the other origin children. And so then the origin children that are at the full new excuse me found moon,
Yeah.
they're like, why don't you just move into our cabin with us? Like you're already separated from us. It would kind of be better for you anyways. And so then
This
she
is
has this incident where she's
something to table for themes and characters. I know we keep tabling things, but like the discussion of how abuse opens you up to having abuse perpetrated, like because
yeah.
you go to certain communities to feel safe, and then you are preyed upon there as well, and it's awful. But this is a very stark look at that.
Well, and then the stress of this situation causes Nasun to have like this incident with a Taurus. And
Mm-hmm.
then from that moment forward, Shaf was like, I'm insisting that you stay at Found the Moon in the children's cabin.
Mm-hmm.
So then Shafa reveals that Nasun was actually made to be a remedy to the great mistake, which was enslaving Origins, a system that was possibly set up by Origins who ran the Fulcrum,
Mm-hmm.
and that they were made to obey and become desperate. And Guardians were complicit in this. And he wants to repair the feud by creating allies. And Nasun wakes from a nightmare later on and ends up tragically icing
I
eights.
know.
And in this moment, as this is happening, Jija is climbing up the hill to the Found Moon cabin
Mm-hmm.
to find Nasun and is stopped by Shafa, who says she doesn't need a father or a mother. And then he physically harms Jija and terrifies
Mm-hmm.
him. And Jija goes and leaves to find Nasun's things. And
Mm-hmm.
then Nasun is obviously very distressed from this
Yeah.
situation with eights, and so are the other people in the cabin. But Shafa ends up comforting Nasun, and she tries to explain the nightmare and that she was dreaming of node stations, essentially, which he finds fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And also of a community of origins, the Antarctic fulcrum. And so Shafa then tells Nasun that she is his monster when she shares her fears about killing eights, which is just absolutely disgusting for a child to say to you, like, I feel like I'm a monster, and you to reply, but you're my monster, is
Yep.
just disgusting. So we switch back over to our POV, and things seem worse in Kostrima over, and we're still training Origin children, but we're not gentle. We're like, we've got to prepare them because things are hard, so we have to be hard. And we try to handle our regret over teaching Nasun and Uche the way that we did. But it's really hard to balance all of this. And so we go and we are with Alabaster, and he's failing, and we're just feeling all this urgency and despair. But he's just kind of insistent that we need to give up teaching others so that we can learn ourselves. He's like,
he,
you're wasting
he's
your
really like,
time.
look, it's not, if you don't fix this,
It's
you're
not
there's
that
not gonna.
important for them to learn. And
It's also hard though because it's like the one place where we feel like we thrive is as a teacher. Like you do learn that, like, oh,
mhm.
we're a pretty effective teacher through all this.
And
But
we're also concerned because we don't know in terms of like timeline how much time we're going to be there, how long Castrima is going to be there. So we feel like we do have an obligation to kind of help extend the longevity of this place.
mhm.
So we learn from Alabaster that magic and energy are different. And the origins who could cess magic ended up in nodes.
Mhm.
And the Guardians are actually basically in control of everything, but
Yeah.
they make the stills think that they're in control and that they have control over the origins.
Yeah.
And we realize that Guardians ride out seasons somewhere else. They don't actually die like we've
It's
thought that they did.
incredibly hard to die, and we don't have a moment where we're like, oh, maybe Shafa is alive. We're just like, oh, I guess they don't die. And like, no,
Like,
honey, you're so
okay, well,
close. But yeah.
so we also learned that Alabaster removed the contamination from his guardian. We thought
Mhm.
that he had just killed her, and he's like, no, they're contaminated with this thing. And I just removed her contamination. And Alabaster shares with us that Earth just wants vengeance and that
Mhm.
we need to create this matrix of obelisks to catch the moon
Mhm.
as it comes back in its trajectory. And so then Yika comes in and she's like, Tonki has locked herself in Kastrima's control room. And so we go up there, and
We
on the
also find
way,
out Tonki has like not been doing any work and just
no,
like is the most like
she's
I'm
just like
important.
blowing off
So yeah.
everything and she just doesn't care. She's just kind of just like, this doesn't matter. Who cares about this? Kind of along the lines of Alabaster, where it's just like, you guys are wasting your time collecting goods and we don't need to be doing this.
We do tend to attract chaotic energy. So
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So on the way there, we kind of have this moment where we're reflecting on like Kastrima's creation and its creators. But then Yika's also telling us how like she came to be a leader and
hmm
how when she was young, people saw her use her power. And instead of shunning her or trying to kill her, they were like, we want her trained. We
Yep.
want her in charge. And this is
But
so
we want to
unique to
do it
us.
in secret. We do not want to send her to the
Hmm.
fulcrum because she has value to us specifically.
Yes.
Yes.
But this is so unique because this is nothing like the experience that we grew up with, where we were seen as something of value, of something
Yep.
of importance, of something that could be useful and to be honestly maybe like kind of put up on a pedestal of sorts
hmm
due to our skill. And Yika really ended up training herself a lot. So
Yep.
we get up to the control room and Tonki is locked in there and eventually she lets us in and there's like these really interesting like crystals that are blinking and glowing and we realize that Castrima is full of potential obelisks
hmm
and Tonki has just been up there sleeping and studying and
For like 3 days where she's like,
for a
I forgot to
really long
leave.
time. And there's like these plinths in there and there's this really big plinth with etchings on it, these red etchings, and it's clearly the most powerful thing in the whole room. And Tonki's like, just don't touch it. And Yika's like, what do you know about these symbols?
Well,
And
Taki specifically says, "Don't touch it because you're so powerful. You don't know what you'll do." Like
yes.
specifically to us. So,
Hmm.
yeah,
Well, and also to Yika too. She just
yeah.
doesn't really want anyone to touch it because it's just a little unknown at this point. And those symbols, Tonki's like, well, you've seen them too. They were like in the fulcrum. And we're like, oh, the socket. And Tonki's like, yeah, it's the mark of the enemy. And so when we don't share what we know about when we don't share what we know about the obelisks and what their connection is to the earth, Tonki brings up Alia, which really upsets us, and we have to take a minute to like calm down. And so then Yika's like, you know what? Yeah, I'm gonna kick you out of Kastrima because you are not being helpful, and I want this place to last. And
hmm
Tonki's like, you know what? And tries to like bolt back towards the plinths,
Oh
but
my
ends up
gosh.
freezing and
hmm
yells because something is in her. And when we touch her, we notice that there's like something moving under her skin. And so we have to get a knife and we have to cut like deep into her body to get this thing out of her because
hmm
it's trying to get to her Cesapine. And we end up remembering the way that Alabaster removed that toxin from someone previously, and we have to use this trick to grab at the thing. But as we're trying to do this, it's like moving through her body, through her arterioles, and it's got like tendrils basically. And we're kind of losing sense of reality as we're trying to remove this thing. And all of a sudden we wake up and we're just covered in blood. And we're like, why are we covered in blood? And we look and we are holding Tonki's severed arm.
hmm
And so just out of like shock, we fling it away from us and it's like moving and kind of twitching. And then all of a sudden we see this iron shard, the little enemy, fall out on the floor. So then we go to the interlude and Hoa is sharing with us that he's never been a child, but we should imagine him as a monster or a legend. And that
hmm
Castrima is basically like an egg that's being devoured for some reason. And for some reason, the scavengers stopped. And that they shouldn't fear Antimony, who will always be protecting Alabaster, but they should fear Hoa. And he destroyed three of them on the first day after he left us. And then he took Luster, who was the red haired
hmm
stone eater. And then he
We
went
always
and
talk about this is like one where not Alabaster, sorry. Hoa always talks about stone eaters as if they are paired with
mhm,
orogeny or origins. So it's
mhm.
interesting. I'm not sure exactly what's happening, but I've flagged
It's
it.
more like they're drawn to
Hmm.
orogeny, not necessarily like paired, but he also reveals then that he took out two stone eaters that were stalking Alabaster.
Hmm.
And so we get this idea that stone eaters are just like drawn to power like
Yeah.
this. And so we learn that stone eaters don't die. So he's like, don't feel sad, they don't die. And they can reconstitute their atoms in many years and be back.
Hmm.
And he's like, this slaughter scared some of the others, and still some of them are drawn to us. And so he's like, so I sort of made friends with some of them, and they were speaking of another old one with a vision that is in opposition to Hoa's. And he's like, and he will try and kill you, Essen, and he can make you destroy yourself. And he has allies up in the north that are going to try and help him do this, which is ominous because who's up
Foreshadowing.
north?
Hmm.
OMG. So back to our POV.
Could you imagine
Six,
if at one point we just said OMG in this book?
that would be really bad. And it would be very out of character for
Yes,
N.K.
for
Jemisin to
anyone. Yeah,
delve into
for
my horrible writing. But anyways, um, we switch back over to our POV, and it's 6 months later. Tonki's arm has been reattached, but she's had kind of a rough go of it with infections and fevers and things like that. And now
and
she
she
gets like
won't stop complaining about it.
no. And she makes like these horrible jokes to us and everything, which makes us uncomfortable. But
Yeah.
she has these random like phantom tinglings and numbness, which is really rough. And also, Hyarka and Tonki have started a relationship, which is very cute because Hyarka was like, I'll use her own love language and bring her books.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we're kind of developing a little more of a relationship with Lerna because he's
And
finally forgiving us.
but
And
also people are interested in us because we're only 43 and we could
because we
potentially
could make some
make,
babies,
yeah, we could
which
make
is
origins.
weird.
So yeah, it's really weird to be like,
And
hey,
it
you look
also
like you'd
weirds
be
us out because we
strong.
just like can't even imagine that at this point. We're like, there's so much going on and everything. And so like Tonki has made this report that's like really bleak and a warning about what's to come and how we need to like keep doing such and such things to keep us alive and everything. And we're still teaching. And then there's this woman who becomes pregnant, which causes a lot of disputes. And
Hmm.
be- it's one of those deals where it's like we don't have a lot of food and a lot of things to provide for the people that we have. So we're going to bring a person into this that really isn't that useful for quite a while. But Yika even makes a comment about, like, oh, well, it's no big deal because we're going to lose somebody soon, hopefully,
Yeah.
meaning Alabaster, which makes us
We
upset.
get pretty upset about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Alabaster is just getting worse despite our continued progress. And so then we find out that there's these hunters that go up into Kostrima over and they find this note saying, Welcome to Renanis, which
Hmm.
causes us to which basically causes chaos because this is an equatorial city that's basically trying to like induct us into their comm.
Yeah.
And so we use the Topaz obelisk to look north and we see there is a big army that has formed in the forest basin. And Yika's like ringing these bells, which it doesn't seem like a great idea underground and with all these stones and everything, all these crystals to start ringing a bunch of bells. But she does, and she alerts everyone in Kostrima to the situation. And it seems like we're likely going to have to fight. And then all of a sudden, this stone eater appears who is like an older male. And we realize he is holding Hoa's arm.
Hmm.
And he tells us that their comm has resources and that we must join their comm, but they don't have any use for origins. And he says Hoa is dead, which causes us to react immediately and cut off
Yes.
his hand. And
Hmm.
so then we take Hoa's arm, and there's these tendrils that kind of start forming, and they lead us to our apartment, where we find Hoa, or what's left of him, these like stone
Yes.
lumps, and he's missing his jaw and arms, and he just looks horrendous. And so
Yeah.
we end up feeding him, and he gets surrounded by these tendrils in this light, and he's basically becoming remade.
Hmm.
And this geode forms, and it cracks open and it reveals the Stone Eater from the Garnet Obelisk that we had seen
Hmm.
previously,
Yep.
which was always kind of scary to us before. But
I mean, it's a
now,
terrifying thing to see.
well,
And
because it was like
yeah.
frozen in a scream.
Yeah. So it's frozen in a scream. We thought it was dead. There's just, it has a lot of deep attachment to us. So yeah.
Yes. So then we switch back over to Nasun, and the Guardians from Found Moon are talking to people from the Antarctic fulcrum, which is really struggling for supplies. And also, they don't have very many grits. Like, this is a rough time for them. It's a season. And Schaffa is like, well, you guys are supposed to shut down. Like, fulcrums are supposed to shut down during seasons, and the origins are supposed to eliminate themselves to give other people a better chance because
Yeah.
you guys are just too skilled, too advanced. You're supposed to just off yourselves so that other people have a better chance, which is horrific.
I
And
know it's so bad how he's like, well, you should be ashamed you didn't do that.
oh
Like,
my
that's his
gosh.
energy. And it's just like, dear God, my guy. Like,
Ugh, it's everything about him is disgusting. But it's it seems a little off there. Like things don't seem totally right. And it seems like the Guardians were killed. So Schaffa and the others start moving quickly and they start killing all of the origins in the admin
mhm.
building where they're at. And they're like, Nasun, go ahead and leave. You don't have to be here for this. And so she ends up going and walking around outside and kind of just acting like things are normal while her buddies are in there killing everyone in the admin
And
building.
she has like zero reaction to this. She's just like,
Oh,
well, it's par for the course. And it's like,
oh well,
oh
just Shaffa
God.
being Shaffa.
Yeah, like that they should have known better. And it's like, okay,
It's
honey. Like,
all out of love. Oh
yeah.
gosh.
Ugh.
But she goes for a walk and she meets this young grit girl and she in talking to her, starts to understand her mother more, which is a really sad moment because this girl is talking to her and is like, oh, yeah, how's your training going? What's your origin name? Did they break your hand? And she
Hmm.
starts talking about all these things that the fulcrum does to train its origins. And Nasun's like, oh, so the reason that my mother is the way she is because of the fulcrum. The fulcrum made my mother wrong. And
Hmm.
so then Schaffa then returns to Nasun, and Umber and Schaffa seem to be a little bit at odds. Something's kind of like there's a little bit of tension there between them. And Nasun asks Schaffa why that thing was put in the back of his head when he was young. And he also doesn't really understand his own creation or his own origin, if we
Origin. Ooh.
go with that. And so then, as they're traveling back, Nasun assesses a stone eater who appears and expresses adoration for her work and tells her that Shafa doesn't have to suffer anymore. I can help you. I can teach you how to eliminate his pain.
Well, and I thought like it kind of explained the Stone Eater in a way that I figured it was the one that we just saw. Like it's because it was like, oh, it's a man who's shirtless and everything, and that was like
Hmm.
a description that we used for the guy who brought us Hoa's arm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so he offers to teach her in exchange for an alliance. And she's like, well, what's your name? And he's like, I don't really have a name. I mean, she decides to call him Steel. And so then he leaves, and Umber comes out of the forest, and he and Nasun are a bit at odds, but they both decide to kind of, call a truce, trust each other, and he will trust her love for Shafa. And there seems to be this mutual, like, okay, we both have an understanding in regards to Shafa
Yes.
between the two of them, so we won't have to bother each other. And so then they go to sleep. But before Nasun goes to sleep, she notices that there's this light, this really bright light in the sky that's moving in a different direction from the rest of them. And she's finding that a little strange. And that is the end of chapter 15.
I'm very interested to see what happens the next. I feel like this one is like a lot more wild. Like there's so many things happening. I don't even have any predictions at this point where I'm
Hmm.
like, well, I'm just along for the ride because this is random.
Well, and even I feel like this one definitely, you're right, it ramps up in terms of like the first book of this series was very much like setting the story and
Mhm.
laying that groundwork and getting us to know the characters and telling us how we got to where we are. Now we're where we are, and things are just happening at
Happening. Yeah.
a breakneck speed
Yes.
that it's hard to keep up at times, and there's just so much going on and so many moving parts that you really have to pay attention. But I think it's hard to make predictions at this point
Yeah.
because who
Anything
knows
can
what's going to
happen.
happen.
Which reminds me, remind me to tell you about me watching Howl's Moving Castle because I had never actually watched
Oh,
a
you've
Studio
never
Ghibli
seen it?
movie. No, I hadn't watched a Studio Ghibli movie as an adult. I had only seen like bits and pieces when I was younger. So it was my first
Oh,
one. And I forgot to talk about it. But that is a preview for next week,
okay.
everyone, so that you can join us next week as we finish the plot of The Obelisk Gate by N.K.
Yes.
Jemisin. But in the meantime, if you could rate, review, and subscribe, or tell a friend about us to invite them along in this journey as we dive into breaking the earth. If you can also follow us at Our Pod, OWWR Pod, on all the social media platforms that we are on, or check us out at ourpod.com to see our reading lists and everything we're doing over there because we have some
And thanks for
amazing.
listening today.
Yeah, we appreciate you all. Can't wait to discuss more next week. Bye.
Bye.